The rain poured relentlessly, soaking the abandoned trail. A young girl's trembling voice called out from the shadows, whispering, "Please, take me home." But the German shepherd planted his paws firmly in the mud, refusing to move. Fear, instinct, and something unspoken held him in place. Every second counted, and every moment they waited felt like an eternity. The storm had begun hours earlier, a furious downpour that turned the narrow forest paths into rivers of mud and slippery stones. Captain Evan Marshall had expected rough weather, but nothing could have prepared him for the chaos unfolding tonight. His dog, Shadow, a massive German shepherd with fur now darkened by rain, moved cautiously, paws slipping slightly on the slick trail. The girl had been lost since mid-afternoon, separated from a family outing that had gone awry when the sudden storm hit. Her small voice carried faintly through the trees, trembling yet persistent. "Please, someone, take me home." Shadow stopped abruptly, ears pricked, nose to the ground. His training was evident, he sensed more than just the girl. Danger lurked ahead. Fallen branches, hidden roots, and the rising floodwaters made every second perilous. Evan called gently, "Shadow, it's okay. We've got her." But Shadow remained immovable, muscles coiled, instincts refusing to let him advance blindly. The girl's whispers grew more desperate. She huddled under a partially fallen tree, water soaking her clothes, eyes wide with fear and hope. She hadn't yet seen Shadow, but she could feel presence, something large and watchful, waiting. Evan crouched low beside his dog, checking the child's last known location on his GPS device. Each step forward had to be deliberate. He could hear the storm's roar in the distance, thunder rolling and lightning illuminating the tree canopy in jagged flashes. The forest seemed alive, every gust of wind a warning, every shadow a potential threat. He whispered to Shadow again, softer this time, a mix of command and reassurance. The dog's amber eyes met his, unyielding, intelligent, cautious. Evan knew Shadow was making a decision for all their lives, not just his own. Minutes passed as they navigated deeper into the woods. The girl's cries grew louder, closer now, carried by the wind yet interrupted by the thunder. "Please, take me home." Her words were almost drowned by the storm, but they gave Evan and Shadow the direction they needed. At last, through a break in the trees and the curtain of rain, they saw her. Small, shivering, her coat clinging to her frame, eyes wide in fear. The ground around her was slick with mud, and the slightest misstep could send her sliding down a steep incline. Evan stepped forward, carefully, but Shadow planted himself firmly, growling softly, a warning Evan understood immediately. Danger was close, far closer than they had realized. The forest floor had collapsed into a hidden trench, partially concealed by fallen leaves and rainwater. One wrong step would plunge the girl into a muddy torrent. Shadow refused to move, his stance rigid, a protective barrier between her and unseen perils. Evan reached the girl cautiously. "Hey there," he said gently, kneeling to her level. "You're safe now. I'm Captain Evan, and this is Shadow." She flinched, then relaxed slightly, sensing the trust and calm emanating from the soldier and his dog. But Shadow didn't move. Not an inch. He growled low, a deep warning that vibrated through Evan's chest. The girl's small hand reached out, hesitant, and touched the dog's wet fur. Shadow's eyes softened slightly, but he still remained rooted, every muscle alert. He had sensed the hidden danger, the sudden drop, the mud trap, and the potential floodwater lurking unseen. Evan realized then what the dog had already known: rushing forward could be deadly. Shadow was protecting her in a way that no human could, blending instinct and intelligence into action. "All right, boy," Evan murmured, pride and worry mixing in his voice. "We'll find another way." The rain intensified, drumming on the trees like a relentless army of drums. Shadows and movement in the forest suggested the storm had shifted the terrain, branches broken, ground eroded, and water running in unpredictable channels. They needed a plan. Evan glanced at the girl. You trust me?" she whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the storm, yet clear enough. She had already understood, without words, that this dog was not just refusing to move out of stubbornness, he was protecting her. The girl nodded, clutching Shadow's fur for warmth. Evan felt a surge of respect and awe for his companion. This dog had refused orders, refused to move, in order to save a child he hadn't even met before today. Heroism didn't always roar, it sometimes stayed quiet, rooted in instinct and loyalty. The storm raged on, the forest a chaotic labyrinth, yet Evan knew that together, with Shadow as their guide and protector, they had a chance. Every step forward would have to be calculated, every choice deliberate, but the bond between them, the trust, the loyalty, the courage, was undeniable. And in that moment, Shadow's stance, immovable and resolute, became a promise: I will not let anything happen to her. Not while I am here. The forest seemed to close in around them, a living entity twisting and groaning under the weight of the storm. The rain didn't just fall, it pounded, slapping against the trees, the muddy ground, and the soaked coats of Evan and the girl. Shadow remained unmoving, a steadfast sentinel planted firmly between the child and the unknown dangers lurking just beyond the dim visibility. Evan's heart pounded, not just from the storm or the urgency of the rescue, but from the sheer intensity of Shadow's vigilance. This was no ordinary instinct, this was intelligence honed by years of training, tempered with an almost mystical understanding of danger. The German shepherd's eyes flicked constantly, scanning every shadow, every movement, every unusual ripple in the rainwater. The girl, no more than 8 or 9, huddled closer to Shadow, her arms wrapped around his wet fur. She had tried to walk, but the dog's firm stance refused her movement. Evan understood now, it wasn't defiance. Shadow had identified a hidden risk, the ground ahead was unstable. One false step could send her plunging into a ravine that the storm had carved out in minutes. Evan dropped to the ground beside the girl, muddy water soaking his pants. He whispered, "It's okay, sweetie. Shadow knows what he's doing. We just need to wait and find a safe way around." The girl's small voice trembled. I can't see the path." She looked around, eyes wide, water dripping down her face. Fear and exhaustion had begun to gnaw at her, but the dog's steady gaze offered a strange comfort. She realized she wasn't alone. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the forest, the sound of a massive branch giving way, plunging into the underbrush. Evan froze, his instincts screaming danger, but Shadow didn't flinch. Instead, his growl deepened, a low rumble that resonated through the storm-soaked woods. The girl clutched Shadow tighter, her trust in the dog absolute despite the chaos surrounding them. Lightning flashed, illuminating the forest in stark, fleeting white. The trench ahead, previously obscured by rain and shadows, glimmered with perilous clarity. The mud had loosened, forming small rivulets that twisted unpredictably, carrying debris with the current. Any step forward could be catastrophic. Evan reached for his radio but quickly realized there was no signal this deep in the forest. They were on their own. Every decision had to be precise, every movement could mean the difference between safety and disaster. Shadow's stance didn't just guard, they guided, communicating without words, indicating the exact moment and direction to advance. The girl, shivering violently, whispered, I can't. I don't know how to walk through this." Evan met her gaze. "Then don't," he said softly. "Let Shadow show us the way. Trust him." Shadow's nose twitched, sniffing the air, then lowered slightly toward the left. Evan understood immediately, the safest route was not the obvious one. A small gap between 2 ancient pines, barely visible through the heavy rain, led to firmer ground. One misstep, and the child could be swept away by mud or hidden currents from the stormwater. With careful, deliberate movements, Evan positioned himself beside Shadow, guiding the girl's small steps inch by inch. The German shepherd never wavered, each paw planted firmly, eyes sharp as they traversed the treacherous terrain. Each movement was a silent dialogue between soldier and dog. Evan moved cautiously, shadowed by instinct and discipline, shadow-led, warning, blocking, ensuring the child's path remained secure. The storm's fury intensified. Thunder cracked so close it seemed to shake the very earth beneath them. Rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the forest floor into a slick, glistening mess. Yet, amid the chaos, the trio moved with remarkable synchronicity. Shadow's growl warned of hidden holes. Evan's steady hands guided the girl. Her trust and courage grew, fueled by the silent hero standing before her. Minutes stretched like hours. Every step forward was fraught with tension, the forest testing them at every turn. A small landslide of wet leaves and soil cascaded down a nearby slope, reminding Evan of the precariousness of their situation. But Shadow's unwavering presence and the girl's growing faith created a shield against panic. Finally, they reached a small plateau, a relatively safe patch of earth, slightly elevated, with firmer footing. The girl sank to her knees, exhausted, water dripping from her hair and clothes. Shadow dropped his stance slightly, though still alert, allowing her to regain strength. Evan knelt beside her, drying her face as best he could with his coat. "You did great," he whispered. "Shadow did great. We're not out of this yet, but we're moving in the right direction." The girl nodded, tears mixing with the rain, gratitude in her eyes. Shadow's ears flicked, sensing movement deeper in the forest. The storm wasn't over, and neither was the danger, but for the first time, the girl felt a flicker of hope, powered by the courage of the dog who refused to move yet led them to safety. The plateau offered only a brief respite. Rain still fell in sheets, drumming relentlessly against the leaves and the soldiers' soaked jackets. Evan scanned the area, his eyes tracing the contours of the forest floor that now resembled a chaotic riverbed more than solid ground. Shadow's ears twitched, alert to every shift, every snap of a branch, every gurgle of water carving its way down the slopes. The girl, still clutching Shadow's wet fur, shivered violently. Her small teeth chattered, but she refused to let go. It was as though the German shepherd had become the only anchor in a world suddenly turned alien. Evan crouched beside her, whispering calm assurances. "We've made it this far. Stay close, follow Shadow, and we'll get through this." They could hear the storm working its mischief around them, the wind howling through the pines like a chorus of angry spirits, the distant roar of falling water as tiny rivulets merged into larger, faster streams. Mudslides had already taken trees down, blocking paths they might have otherwise taken. The terrain was constantly changing, and every step forward required careful calculation. Shadow suddenly stiffened, tail raised, body rigid. A low growl began deep in his throat, vibrating with intensity. Evan followed the line of the dog's gaze and froze. Ahead, a gaping hole had opened between two trees, half hidden under mud and leaves. The storm had carved out a trap, a sudden collapse of earth that could have swallowed them whole if they'd stepped without noticing. Evan knelt beside the girl, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. "Look here," he said, pointing. "Shadow won't move past this for a reason. That gap is dangerous. We'll find another way." The girl's small fingers trembled as she gripped Shadow's fur. "I can't. I don't know where to go." Her voice cracked, barely audible over the storm's roar. Evan gave her a reassuring nod. "Then you follow him. Watch him, trust him. He'll guide us." Shadow carefully maneuvered to the side, sniffing along the edge of the plateau. His movements were deliberate, almost methodical. Then, with a sudden pivot, he darted toward a narrow passage between two fallen pines, partially hidden by the storm. Evan and the girl followed cautiously, inch by inch, testing the footing before each step. The forest seemed to conspire against them. A branch snapped under Evan's boot, sending him stumbling, but Shadow caught him mid-fall with a nudge of his snout. The girl gasped, eyes wide, but didn't cry out. She had learned, in those few harrowing minutes, that panic could be worse than the storm itself. Shadow's calm and unwavering presence anchored her in a way nothing else could. They moved deeper into the forest, each step a negotiation with the terrain. The mud pulled at their boots, water threatened to knock them off balance, and the wind's fury made even speaking impossible at times. Yet, Evan couldn't deny the surreal synchronization forming between the trio. Every glance, every subtle motion, every growl or bark from Shadow communicated unspoken instructions, guiding them past hidden dangers and treacherous footing. Suddenly, a louder crack rang through the forest. A massive tree, weakened by the rain, toppled across their intended path. Evan froze. The tree was too large to move and too slippery to climb over safely. The girl clutched Shadow's neck, fear radiating in her eyes. Shadow growled, pacing back and forth, then turned to Evan, eyes fixed, as if asking silently, "What now?" Evan swallowed, scanning for alternatives. The storm had closed off every obvious route. Then he noticed a subtle indentation in the mud to the left, partially hidden by debris. It led to a slight rise, a safer path above the rushing water below. Shadow sniffed the gap and padded forward cautiously, testing its stability. Evan gestured to the girl. "This way. Step carefully." Shadows checked it already. The child's trust in the dog was complete. She followed, step by careful step, guided by the steadfast creature who refused to move until it was absolutely safe. Evan followed, monitoring both of them, sweat and rain mingling on his face. The storm was relentless, but they were slowly advancing. As they reached the far side of the rise, a deafening roar erupted nearby. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the scene, revealing the full scale of the flood's devastation: fallen trees, mudslides, and racing water cutting through the forest like veins of molten silver. Evan's chest tightened. Each second now carried the weight of life and death. But Shadow remained calm, unwavering, a sentinel in a forest of chaos. The girl whispered, barely audible over the rain, I think we're going to be okay." Evan allowed himself a small nod, hope flickering, but he knew better than to celebrate too soon. The forest was far from tamed, and the storm far from spent. Yet, in that moment, with Shadow's unwavering presence, a fragile thread of hope had formed, a lifeline in the fury of nature. The path narrowed further, hemmed in by fallen trees and thick, twisting roots slick with rain. Every step was an act of calculation. The child's small hands clutched Shadow's fur tightly, her knuckles white. Evan's eyes flicked constantly, scanning for the hidden dangers the storm had created in seconds: sudden drop-offs, treacherous mudslides, pools of rainwater concealing deep holes. Shadow paused suddenly, his body rigid, ears pricked. Evan froze. From the corner of the forest, a distant rumble rolled like an echo of the storm itself, but sharper, more deliberate. Something was moving through the woods, something unnatural. Shadow's growl deepened, vibrating through the air, warning them to stay alert. The girl's voice trembled. Is it a wild animal?" Evan shook his head, keeping his voice calm despite the racing of his heart. "I don't think so, but stay behind Shadow. He'll keep us safe." A flash of lightning revealed the forest floor ahead. A massive tree had been uprooted, blocking their path completely. The roots twisted upward like the claws of some ancient beast, slick with mud and rain. The only way around was a narrow ledge alongside the tree, barely wide enough for the three of them to pass. Evan tested the ledge with one boot. It shuddered slightly, but it held. He motioned to the girl. "Careful. Step slowly, one at a time. Shadow will guide you." The child nodded, swallowing fear, and began inching forward. Her small foot slipped once, and Shadow was instantly there, placing a steady paw on the ledge to stabilize her. Evan's heart leapt. The bond between the child and the dog was extraordinary: silent communication, instinctive protection, unspoken trust. As they advanced, the forest seemed to conspire against them. Another tree groaned above, branches thrashing like wild arms. Evan pushed the girl back, just in time as a massive limb crashed to the ground where she had stood moments before. Shadow barked sharply, ears flattened, growling at the collapsing wood. The girl gasped, tears mixing with rain. I can't. You can, Evan said firmly, voice rising over the storm. You're stronger than you think. Shadow won't let anything happen to you. Trust him. Trust me. We'll get through this. Step by step, they navigated the ledge. Mud clung to their boots, water ran down the slope in dangerous rivulets, and the wind threatened to push them off balance. Every movement required focus, courage, and absolute trust in the dog leading them. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught Evan's eye. Down the slope, a swirl of water carried debris, a mixture of mud, broken branches, and leaves. One wrong step and they could be swept away, caught in the flood that had been growing steadily. Shadow's stance widened, blocking the girl instinctively, his body a living shield against danger. Evan pressed his hand on the child's shoulder. Stay close to him. He knows the safest path. They crept forward, the forest trembling under the storm's relentless assault. Rainwater pooled in unexpected hollows, creating mini whirlpools that threatened to suck them into the mud. Each second carried the potential for disaster, but the dog's unwavering vigilance and the soldier's precise guidance created a fragile rhythm of survival. Then came a moment of silence, a brief, almost surreal pause. The storm's roar continued, but a hush fell over the immediate area as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Shadow sniffed the air, ears flicking, and then turned his gaze toward an almost invisible path leading upward, away from the rushing water and collapsing trees. Evan understood immediately. This was their chance. We follow him, he whispered to the girl. This is it. Almost there. The girl nodded, her fear still palpable but tempered by trust. She followed Shadow, step by careful step, her small boots sliding in mud, her hands clutching his fur. Evan followed closely, his muscles tense, ready to react instantly if the unstable ground betrayed them. As they ascended the slope, the storm raged on, yet the trio moved with remarkable precision and unity. Shadow's growl warned of hidden hazards, Evan's calm presence provided guidance and reassurance, the girl's growing courage and trust created a fragile but unbreakable chain binding them together. Finally, they reached a narrow ridge, elevated above the worst of the floodwaters below. Evan exhaled, wet and exhausted, but grateful. The girl sank to her knees beside Shadow, hugging him tightly. I thought I'd never make it, she whispered. Shadow lowered his stance slightly, still alert, ears flicking as he scanned the forest. Evan crouched beside the girl, gently brushing the rain from her hair. You did it. We did it, he said, voice trembling with relief and pride. Thanks to him. The storm had not yet relented, but for the first time since the chaos began, there was a sense of hope, a fragile, precious thread connecting soldier, child, and K9, binding them together against the fury of nature. The ridge offered momentary safety, but the storm showed no sign of mercy. Rain lashed down in sheets, turning the path ahead into a treacherous, slick nightmare. Every movement was a calculated risk. Mud and debris threatened to pull them down the slope, while water gushed through hidden channels like molten rivers. Evan scanned the ridge, tension tight in his shoulders. We can't stay here long, he muttered, more to himself than to the girl. His eyes flicked to Shadow, who was already sniffing the edge of the ridge, muscles taut, ears pricked. The dog's amber eyes glowed like lanterns in the storm, scanning for threats invisible to human vision. The girl huddled against Shadow, teeth chattering, eyes wide with fear. I don't think I can move any further, she whispered, voice barely audible over the thunderous roar of the storm. Evan knelt beside her, gripping her small shoulders. You can, he said firmly. I'll be right here. Shadow will lead the way. One step at a time. You've already made it this far. Suddenly, A deafening crack split the air, a massive branch, loosened by the wind and rain, snapped and hurtled toward them. Evan lunged, pulling the girl down behind him as the branch slammed into the ridge just inches away, splintering into a shower of sharp wood fragments. Shadow barked, growled, and leapt toward the danger, positioning himself between the girl and the falling debris, his body taking the brunt of the impact. The girl gasped, gripping his wet fur. He saved me," she cried, tears streaming down her rain-soaked cheeks. Evan nodded, voice tight with adrenaline and awe. "Yes, he did. And he'll keep saving you. Trust him, always." They pressed forward, inch by cautious inch. The ridge narrowed further, and the terrain forced Evan to place the girl's tiny boots into the safest patches of mud, testing each step. Shadow stayed ahead, moving like a sentinel, sometimes pausing to ensure the girl's path was secure. His growls cut through the storm, warning of hidden holes or loose debris beneath the mud. Lightning flashed again, revealing the chaos around them, trees uprooted like matchsticks, the forest floor transformed into a river of mud and debris, water cascading in torrents down every slope. Evan could feel the raw power of nature pressing down on them, each second a battle between courage and instinct, survival and fear. A sudden roar behind them made Evan freeze. A mudslide was descending the slope they had just left. The sheer volume of water and earth carved a destructive path, erasing any trail they had walked. It was a stark reminder that every step forward had been a narrow escape from death. The girl clung to Shadow, whispering in his wet ears, "Please, don't let me fall." Shadow responded with a soft, protective nudge of his nose, a silent promise of vigilance. Evan's heart swelled. The trust between the child and the dog had grown into an unbreakable bond, stronger than fear itself. They approached a massive fallen tree, wedged at an angle like a natural bridge over the churning floodwaters below. The only way forward required climbing over it, but the slick surface was coated with mud and rain, offering almost no grip. Evan assessed the situation. "I'll go first," he said. "Shadow will help me. Then the girl follows, step by step. Don't rush. You can do this." He climbed carefully, boots sliding slightly with each movement. Shadow followed, paws sure-footed on the slick surface, guiding the girl with gentle nudges and a watchful eye. The child's small hands gripped his fur tightly, trusting him completely, her fear slowly giving way to determination. Halfway across the log, a sudden crack echoed beneath their feet. The log shifted slightly, threatening to tilt into the raging waters below. Evan froze, heart pounding. Shadow positioned himself instantly, bracing his body, growling, and giving the girl the confidence to inch forward carefully. Step by step, inch by inch, they navigated the unstable log, a near-perfect synchronization of human courage and canine instinct. Finally, they reached the far side of the fallen tree. Evan exhaled, wet and exhausted, but alive. The girl sank to her knees, hugging Shadow tightly, sobbing with relief. I thought I'd never make it," she whispered. Evan knelt beside her, brushing wet hair from her face. "You did it. You survived. And it's thanks to him. Shadow never leaves your side." The storm continued its relentless assault, but for the first time, there was a palpable sense of hope. The trio had survived the forest's fury, relying on trust, courage, and the unshakable bond between a soldier, a child, and a German shepherd. Evan looked at Shadow, whose fur was matted with mud and rain, but whose eyes burned with quiet determination. "Good boy," he murmured. "We're almost there. Just a little further." The girl nestled against Shadow, her small body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. She whispered, "Please, take me home." Shadow responded with a gentle nudge, as if saying, "I won't move until you're safe." Together, they pressed on, inching toward safety, toward the warmth of shelter and the end of the storm's relentless fury. The ridge finally began to widen, offering a fragile promise of safety. Rain still poured relentlessly, but the sheer width of the path allowed Evan to slow his pace, to observe rather than merely survive. Shadow, ever vigilant, led the way, nose to the ground, scanning the terrain with an instinctive precision that no human could match. The child's small hands were still gripping his wet fur, her face streaked with mud and tears. Her body shivered from the cold and adrenaline. Are we going to make it?" she whispered, voice trembling. Evan glanced at her, exhaustion etched into his soaked features. "We're going to make it." "Almost there," he said. But even as he spoke, he knew that the forest could never be trusted entirely. One misstep, one hidden root, one slick patch of mud, and the storm could still claim them. Ahead, a faint glow caught Evan's eye. Through the dense trees and heavy rainfall, he spotted a hollowed-out stone ledge, partially sheltered by overhanging branches. It was small, but it offered a dry spot above the rapidly rising water. Evan's pulse quickened. "That's it. That's where we take a break. Shadow, lead the way." The dog bounded ahead, confident and sure, guiding the girl over the remaining treacherous patches. Mud splashed around their boots, water rushed past, but each step brought them closer to the faintly glowing refuge. The child stumbled on a slick root, nearly falling into a puddle of icy water. Shadow reacted instantly, placing a protective paw behind her back to steady her. Evan's heart leapt. Every second counts, he thought, watching the bond between child and dog deepen with each near miss. Finally, they reached the ledge. Evan helped the girl up, brushing rain from her hair and clothes. She collapsed against Shadow, burying her face in his fur, sobbing softly. I thought I'd never get out," she whispered. Shadow lowered himself to allow her a moment of comfort, his body warm despite being soaked in rain. Evan crouched beside them, finally allowing himself a deep breath. The forest was still roaring around them, but here, in this small stone alcove, there was a fragile sense of sanctuary. Evan's eyes scanned the surrounding area. The storm had shifted debris, broken trees, and churned the earth into chaotic patterns, but the ledge appeared stable. It was as if nature itself had carved out a temporary haven for them. But he knew better than to let his guard down. The girl, still clinging to Shadow, whispered again, Will it be safe now?" Evan's hand rested on her shoulder. "For now," he said cautiously. "We've made it through the worst, but we'll keep moving carefully. Shadow will show us the safest path." Suddenly, a distant roar of water reminded them that the flood wasn't done. A small waterfall had formed along the slope, cascading into a pool that glimmered with the reflection of lightning. The storm's fury was a constant threat, but Evan realized that they were learning to read its rhythms, to anticipate its dangers. Shadow sniffed the air, ears flicking. He turned to Evan and barked softly, then padded toward a narrow path that wound upward along the ridge, partially shielded by dense pine trees. It was barely visible, but Shadow moved with confidence, guiding them onward. Evan helped the girl to her feet, gripping her hand tightly. "We follow him. One step at a time," he instructed. Each movement required careful judgment, one false step could send them tumbling down the slope. But with Shadow leading, Evan felt a cautious optimism he hadn't dared to feel before. They moved forward slowly, the storm still battering them, but the immediate danger had lessened. The girl whispered softly to Shadow, "Thank you for staying with me." Shadow responded with a gentle nuzzle, his amber eyes scanning the path ahead. As they progressed, Evan noticed something in the distance, a faint glow of warm light. It was subtle, barely cutting through the storm's darkness, but it was unmistakable, a sign of possible shelter. His heart leapt. "Look," he said softly. "Do you see that? Light. Shelter. We're almost there." The girl's eyes widened, hope flickering through her exhaustion. Shadow barked once, a short, sharp sound, then led the way toward the faint illumination, moving with the precision and calm that only a seasoned rescue dog could exhibit. Evan followed closely, keeping his eyes on the path and the girl, ensuring every step was safe. Mud, rain, and debris no longer felt insurmountable. They were challenges to be navigated with patience, courage, and trust in Shadow. Finally, the trio reached a slightly elevated clearing, partially shielded by large pine trees. Rainwater ran off the thick needles, creating small streams that diverted from their position. For the first time, Evan allowed himself a small smile. They had survived the forest's wrath, at least for now. The child sank to her knees, hugging Shadow with all her remaining strength. I think we made it," she whispered. Shadow rested his head gently on her shoulder, eyes alert, body still tense with readiness. Evan stood beside them, rain streaming down his face, heart still pounding but filled with relief. Even as the storm continued around them, the clearing felt like a fragile sanctuary, a temporary victory won through courage, skill, and the unbreakable bond between human and canine. The clearing offered a temporary respite, but Evan knew better than to linger too long. Floodwaters could rise again, debris could shift, and the forest was far from done with its tests. Shadow stood alert, ears pricked, muscles tensed, scanning the darkened forest around them. Every drop of rain seemed louder here, echoing like whispers of danger. Evan lifted the child to her feet once more, brushing mud from her soaked clothes. "We'll rest for a few minutes," he said softly, "but then we move. We need to keep toward higher ground." The girl clung to Shadow's side, as if fearing he might disappear. I don't want to go," she murmured. Her voice quivered, a mix of exhaustion and lingering terror. Shadow nuzzled her hand reassuringly, amber eyes calm yet vigilant. Evan took a deep breath, observing the forest around them. Tree branches were slick with rain, the ground uneven and treacherous. In some places, water pooled into small but dangerous traps. Fallen logs and broken roots formed natural barricades, forcing them to navigate slowly and cautiously. Each step required concentration and patience. As they moved, the forest seemed to change its rhythm. The relentless patter of rain shifted to a more rhythmic, almost musical drizzle, creating pockets of calm that felt like temporary oases. Shadow seemed to sense this, slowing his pace and leading them through a series of narrow paths, carefully avoiding unstable terrain. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed from the hillside above. Loose rocks tumbled down, spattering the ground near them. The girl screamed and pressed herself against Shadow's chest. Evan steadied her, his hand firm on her shoulder. "Stay close. Keep moving," he instructed. Shadow barked sharply, a warning and reassurance rolled into one. They continued along the ridge, the path narrowing further. Evan had to balance the child in one arm at times, the other hand gripping roots and rocks for support. The dog moved ahead, sniffing, then pausing to ensure the ground ahead was safe. The girl's small voice broke the tense silence. I think I see something." She pointed toward a faint glow behind a cluster of pine trees. Evan squinted, and indeed, there it was, a subtle flicker of light, likely a reflection from a clearing or shelter. His pulse quickened. "Good eye. That might be our next stop," he whispered. They made their way cautiously toward the light. Along the path, debris and mud challenged every step. A broken branch nearly caused the child to trip, but Shadow was instantly there, placing himself to steady her with his body. Evan's heart pounded, gratitude and awe mingling together. He's more than a dog, he's a lifeline. The clearing they approached was larger than the previous one, a gentle slope rising above the floodwaters. Patches of dry land were visible amid scattered puddles, and a few large boulders offered potential shelter from the pouring rain. Evan set the girl down on a relatively dry patch, giving her a moment to catch her breath. The storm had slowed slightly, but the river of rainwater still rushed through the forest with unrelenting power. Shadow sniffed the ground and then padded toward the boulders, circling them as if inspecting the area. His tail twitched with focus, and Evan realized the dog was identifying a temporary safe zone. The girl crouched beside Shadow, hugging his wet fur. "Thank you for keeping me safe," she whispered. Shadow responded with a gentle nuzzle, his calm presence offering comfort beyond words. Evan felt a swell of emotion, gratitude, relief, but also the lingering tension that reminded him the danger wasn't fully over. Suddenly, a sharp crack split the air. A tree branch, weakened by the storm, broke and fell near the edge of the clearing. Water splashed around it, sending mud flying. The girl shrieked, but Evan reacted quickly, pulling her behind him. Shadow growled, a low, threatening rumble, ears flat, body tense. The forest had tested them again, reminding them that their journey wasn't done. Evan's eyes scanned the clearing. They needed to keep moving to higher ground, but they had found a moment of relative safety. He knelt beside the girl, brushing her wet hair from her eyes. "We're okay for now," he said. "But we have to be ready. Shadow will guide us." Shadow barked once, then moved ahead along a narrow ridge that led further uphill. Evan followed, carrying the child, careful with each step. The forest seemed to respond to the presence of the K9 and soldier, a silent acknowledgement of their determination and resilience. As they progressed, Evan couldn't help but notice how the child's fear was slowly transforming into cautious trust. She whispered reassurances to Shadow, her hands brushing over his fur, her small voice gaining strength. Each word, each gesture reinforced the bond, creating an unspoken alliance of survival between human and dog. The clearing behind them grew smaller as they climbed, and the forest opened slightly, revealing distant trees silhouetted against the stormy sky. Evan felt a cautious hope, a fragile thread that promised they might finally reach safety. But he remained vigilant, knowing the forest was unpredictable, capable of sudden shifts and danger. Shadow paused, ears swiveling. He sniffed the air, then barked twice, signaling Evan to halt. Up ahead, a narrow path led through a dense thicket of pines. Beyond it, a soft glow hinted at further shelter, possibly higher ground or a temporary refuge safe from the floodwaters. Evan crouched beside the girl, explaining gently, "That's our next step. Shadow's telling us it's safe, but we move carefully. One step at a time." The girl nodded, gripping his arm tightly. Shadow stayed close, his body a protective barrier between them and the forest's unpredictable threats. They moved slowly, every step measured, navigating roots, mud, and slick rocks. Rain continued to fall, but the rhythm had shifted, the storm's ferocity was easing, allowing them to focus on survival rather than mere endurance. Finally, they reached the thicket. The soft glow beyond promised a moment of respite, a place where the child could rest, where Evan could regroup, and where Shadow could continue his silent guardianship. It was a small victory, but in the midst of the relentless storm, even a small victory meant everything. The path through the thicket narrowed even further, forcing Evan to carefully navigate each step. Mud clung stubbornly to his boots, and every slip could spell disaster. Shadow remained ahead, sniffing and scanning constantly, amber eyes glowing faintly in the filtered light that penetrated the dense pines. The girl held tightly to Evan's arm, her small hands trembling, yet clinging with determination. They finally emerged into a larger clearing, slightly elevated above the floodwaters that had swallowed the lower forest. Water trickled around the edges, creating shallow streams that reflected the gray stormy sky. Fallen branches and uprooted saplings littered the area, evidence of nature's fury. But in the center of the clearing, the ground was firm, dry, stable, and momentarily safe. Evan set the child down gently. She sank to the ground, hugging her knees, exhaustion washing over her in waves. Shadow immediately sat beside her, resting his head on her lap. She reached up, stroking his wet fur, whispering soft words of comfort. "You kept me safe, didn't you?" Shadow responded with a low, reassuring growl, amber eyes locked on the surrounding forest, ever vigilant. Evan took a moment to breathe. He scanned the area, calculating their next move. Though the immediate danger had lessened, the storm had reshaped the terrain. Trees could fall, unseen pools of water could trap them, and the forest's unpredictable nature kept every step fraught with risk. He turned to the girl, kneeling beside her. "We're safe for now. But we need to find a more secure spot, somewhere higher, where the water can't reach us, at least until the storm passes." Her eyes were wide, reflecting a mix of fear and awe. I don't want to leave Shadow," she whispered. "You won't," Evan said firmly. "He's coming with us. Always." Shadow barked softly, as if confirming Evan's words, tail wagging despite the tension. The girl smiled faintly, a flicker of courage returning to her small frame. As they moved toward the far side of the clearing, Evan noticed something unusual, a narrow, partially hidden path leading up a small rise. The ground was uneven but appeared stable, and the trees here were older and sturdier. Shadow sniffed the path, then turned to Evan, signaling it was safe to proceed. They ascended slowly, each step requiring careful placement to avoid loose soil and slick roots. The girl's small hands gripped Evan's shoulders, her legs moving in careful coordination with his. Shadow remained ahead, a steadfast guardian, ears swiveling and alert to every sound. Halfway up the rise, a sudden roar echoed from the nearby ridge. Rocks tumbled down with the force of water still running in hidden streams. The girl gasped, clinging tightly to Evan. Shadow growled, his body low and tense, signaling that danger could strike at any moment. Evan steadied her. "It's okay. We're almost there. Keep moving." His voice was calm, but his mind raced, assessing each possible hazard, each shift in the unstable terrain. Finally, they reached the top of the rise. The view opened to a small plateau, elevated and shielded by dense trees on three sides. Here, the floodwaters could not reach, and fallen logs formed a natural barricade against debris. Evan set the girl down, her knees brushing against the soft undergrowth. Shadow immediately circled, inspecting the perimeter with methodical precision. The girl's small voice broke the tense silence. It's safe here, isn't it?" Evan nodded, kneeling beside her. "For now. But we stay vigilant. Shadow will keep watch, and we'll rest a little before moving further." As the rain softened into a gentle drizzle, the three companions took a moment to breathe. The forest around them hummed with the aftermath of the storm, the distant gurgle of water, the rustle of leaves, and the occasional crack of weakened branches. Each sound was a reminder that danger was never fully gone, but for the first time in hours, there was a sliver of peace. Evan looked at the girl, brushing damp strands of hair from her face. "You've been very brave," he said softly. She looked up at him, eyes glistening, nodding. Shadow rested his chin on her lap, amber eyes calm but alert, a silent promise of protection. Suddenly, a faint cry drifted from the lower forest, carried by the wind. The girl's head turned toward it instinctively, fear momentarily flickering across her features. Evan's jaw tightened, but he remained composed. Shadow's ears twitched, and he padded toward the edge of the plateau, sniffing and growling softly. The source of the cry remained unseen, shrouded by mist and the dense trees. Evan lifted the girl closer, whispering, "Stay close. Shadow and I won't let anything happen to you." He scanned the plateau, planning their next move. The plateau offered temporary safety, but they were still in the heart of the storm's aftermath. Every decision mattered, every step could be critical. Shadow barked again, this time with urgency, then returned to the girl's side. Evan exhaled slowly, recognizing the message. The plateau was safe for now, but vigilance was paramount. The girl, finally able to relax slightly, leaned against Shadow, her trust in him absolute. Evan's eyes swept the surrounding forest, assessing, calculating, always thinking ahead. The storm had tested them, pushed them to their limits, but together, they had survived another trial. Even as the sun struggled to pierce through the thick clouds, the plateau stood firm. Here, for a brief moment, human and dog could rest, hearts pounding but spirits aligned, ready for whatever came next in the treacherous forest. The drizzle had slowed to a gentle mist, but the forest remained a labyrinth of danger. Fallen trees, slick rocks, and hidden pools of water made every step a calculated risk. Evan scanned the area, calculating each move with military precision. Shadow walked ahead, ears swiveling, nose to the ground, alert to every scent, every sound. The girl clung to Evan's arm, exhausted, but determined. Her eyes flickered nervously to the distant sounds of rushing water and the faint cries that had reached their plateau earlier. "Is it far?" she asked, voice trembling. Evan nodded, pointing to a faint clearing through the trees that caught the little light still filtering through the clouds. "A few more minutes. We can make it there." Shadow barked softly, signaling that the path was safe, for now. Evan led the way, stepping over uprooted roots and puddles of mud. The girl followed, trusting him completely, while Shadow circled ahead, ensuring no surprises lurked in the dense undergrowth. Suddenly, the ground beneath them quivered slightly. Evan froze, senses on high alert. The mist swirled around them, and a large fallen branch tumbled near their feet, sending a splash of muddy water over the girl's shoes. She gasped, and Evan's hand shot out to steady her. Shadow growled low, his body tense, scanning the area. Evan realized they were approaching the edge of a small ravine, previously hidden by the trees and mist. The floodwaters had eroded the earth, leaving slippery slopes and unstable banks. One wrong step could send them sliding into the murky current below. He crouched, speaking softly but firmly. "We need to go one at a time. Shadow, stay here and guide her." The dog growled affirmatively and moved beside the girl, guiding her carefully with gentle nudges and watchful eyes. Evan led the way down the ravine, testing each step for stability. The girl followed slowly, trusting Shadow's guidance. Her small hands brushed against the damp earth, roots, and jagged rocks. She shivered, not just from the cold, but from the constant tension that clung to the air like fog. Midway down, a sudden crash echoed through the trees. A massive tree, weakened by the storm, toppled toward them. Evan lunged forward, grabbing the girl just as Shadow barked furiously, positioning himself between the falling trunk and the child. The tree hit the ground with a deafening thud, sending a shower of mud and water into the ravine. Heart pounding, Evan and the girl clung to each other. Shadow's growl softened as he nudged the girl with his nose, reassuring her that she was unharmed. "Good boy, Shadow," Evan whispered, relief mixing with adrenaline. The girl's small hands clutched the dog's fur tightly, her trust absolute. "You kept me safe, didn't you?" she murmured. Shadow responded with a soft bark, amber eyes unwavering. They finally reached the bottom of the ravine, where the forest opened slightly. Here, the trees thinned, and sunlight pierced through the mist, highlighting the flooded terrain ahead. A narrow path led further into the forest, elevated slightly above the surrounding water. It was risky, but it offered a chance to reach a truly safe location. Evan took the girl's hand, helping her onto the narrow path. Shadow remained beside her, protective and alert. Each step forward was a challenge, slippery mud and hidden debris made progress slow. Evan's heart raced, but he focused on steady breathing and careful planning. Every decision now could mean the difference between safety and disaster. As they moved along the path, a faint sound of rushing water grew louder. The floodwaters had carved deep channels through the forest, creating mini rapids and hidden pools. The girl's face tightened with fear. Evan stopped, kneeling beside her. "Listen to me," he said softly. "Shadow and I are here. You just need to stay calm. We'll get you to safety." She nodded, eyes wide, lips trembling. Shadow nudged her hand gently, encouraging her. Evan led them carefully, step by step. They navigated through the final stretch of flooded undergrowth, each movement tense and precise. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the path widened into a small, elevated clearing. The area was surrounded by tall pines, dense underbrush, and a natural embankment shielding it from the floodwaters. Here, the ground was firm, dry, and safe. Evan set the girl down gently, letting her sink into the soft grass. Shadow immediately circled the clearing, inspecting every corner with methodical precision. The girl exhaled in relief, hugging Shadow tightly. "We made it," she whispered, tears mingling with raindrops on her cheeks. Evan knelt beside her, brushing damp hair from her face. "Yes. We did. You were incredibly brave," he said. The bond between human and dog had never been clearer: trust, protection, and courage intertwined in the heart of the forest. Even as the storm clouds lingered, the clearing offered a moment of reprieve. Evan scanned the horizon, noting the distant rise of water and fallen trees. They were safe, but only temporarily. Shadow lay beside the girl, alert but calm, a silent promise that no harm would come while they were together. The forest seemed to exhale around them, the rustle of leaves, the distant gurgle of water, and the occasional call of a bird piercing the mist. For the first time, Evan allowed himself a small smile, seeing the girl's trust in Shadow's unwavering protection. Together, they had survived, navigating nature's fury with courage, skill, and unbreakable bonds. Yet, even in this brief sanctuary, the forest reminded them that danger could return at any moment. Vigilance, teamwork, and resilience would guide their next steps, as they prepared for the final leg of their journey to absolute safety. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long golden rays across the forest clearing. The mist from the earlier storm lingered like a gentle veil, softening the edges of the debris-strewn ground. Evan, exhausted but vigilant, scanned the clearing one last time, ensuring the girl and Shadow were safe from any lingering dangers. The little girl, still clinging to Shadow, finally allowed herself to relax. Her small frame shook with the weight of adrenaline and fear released all at once. I thought we'd never get out," she whispered, voice trembling. Shadow nuzzled her gently, licking her cheek as if to erase the fear etched in her eyes. Evan crouched beside them, hand resting on Shadow's head, feeling the steady warmth of the dog beneath his palm. "It's over for now," Evan said softly, glancing at the flooded forest beyond the clearing. The waters had begun to recede slightly, revealing the extent of the storm's fury. Fallen trees, eroded paths, and muddy channels marked the journey they had survived, a testament to their determination and resilience. The girl's eyes wandered to a small cluster of pines at the edge of the clearing. Their thick trunks and dense needles offered natural shelter, and the elevated ground promised safety from the remaining floodwaters. She ran toward them, Shadow at her heels, and pressed against the tallest tree, hugging it as if it were a guardian. Evan followed slowly, keeping his eyes on the forest around them. Each step was careful, even now, for the forest still held unseen hazards. After a few moments, Evan allowed himself a breath he hadn't taken in hours. The relief wasn't just for their physical safety, it was for the emotional weight lifted from both the girl and Shadow. The bond between them had grown unbreakable during their ordeal. Shadow, who had guided, protected, and reassured the girl at every moment, now sat obediently beside Evan, ears perked, still scanning the periphery. "I don't know how to thank you," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at Evan, eyes glistening with gratitude. "You, and Shadow, you saved me." Evan smiled faintly, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "You were brave too. You stayed calm, followed instructions, and trusted us. That's what helped us all survive." Shadow barked softly, almost as if agreeing, and the girl hugged him tighter, burying her face in his fur. She whispered, "I don't want to leave you." Shadow responded with a gentle nuzzle, resting his head against her shoulder. The connection was palpable, beyond words, a silent promise of protection and loyalty. Evan looked toward the remaining floodwaters, noting the channels that would eventually fill back up if the storm returned. The path back to civilization was still treacherous, but they had found a temporary haven. He knew that with proper guidance, they could make it safely to the edge of the forest before nightfall. As they rested for a moment, the forest seemed to sigh with them. Birds chirped cautiously from the branches, and the rustle of leaves suggested the forest itself was alive, watching, and perhaps approving of their survival. Shadow lay down, his body protective yet relaxed, guarding the girl as she explored the small clearing. Evan watched, noting the sheer trust in their eyes, trust that had been hard-earned through fear, action, and unwavering loyalty. Suddenly, a distant sound caught Evan's attention. It was the low rumble of a vehicle, likely rescue teams or patrolling forest rangers searching for survivors. Relief washed over him, their ordeal was nearing its end. He gestured to the girl in shadow, signaling that it was time to move. The girl looked reluctant but trusted Evan, taking Shadow's leash in her small hands as they prepared to navigate the final stretch out of the forest. Step by careful step, they made their way toward the sound of civilization. Fallen branches were navigated, muddy channels crossed, and every inch forward was a small victory. Shadow stayed at the girl's side, nose down, eyes scanning, ever vigilant. Evan's hand rested on her shoulder, steadying her when the ground threatened to betray their steps. Finally, the clearing gave way to a narrow forest road, partially washed out but passable. The sound of rushing water faded behind them, replaced by the reassuring crunch of gravel beneath their feet. Evan allowed himself a small smile, the storm and its chaos were behind them. The girl glanced at Shadow, whispering, "We made it." I really made it." Shadow barked softly in response, tail wagging, as if to say, "I told you I wouldn't leave you." Evan guided them to the roadside where flashing lights marked the presence of rescue personnel. Rangers and emergency responders waved them forward, their voices calm but urgent. The girl ran toward them, Shadow bounding beside her, protective yet eager to meet the new faces. Evan followed, ensuring nothing was left unresolved. One of the rangers knelt to the girl's level. "You're safe now," she said gently. "Everything's going to be okay." The girl nodded, glancing back at Shadow and Evan, her eyes filled with gratitude and lingering awe. Shadow's amber eyes met hers, steady and unwavering, a silent promise of loyalty that transcended the chaos they had survived. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, Evan finally allowed himself to exhale fully. The forest behind them whispered its final sigh, the storm's fury fading into memory. Shadow rested his head on the girl's lap, her hands stroking his fur gently. The bond between human and dog had endured every test nature had thrown at them. It was unbreakable. For the girl, the ordeal was over, but the memory of courage, loyalty, and survival would remain etched forever. For Shadow, the mission was fulfilled, and his role as protector complete. And for Evan, the satisfaction of seeing both safe, alive, and connected in that small, flooded forest clearing was a quiet triumph, proof that courage, teamwork, and unwavering trust could overcome even the fiercest storms. As night fell and the first stars appeared, Evan, the girl, and Shadow stood together at the edge of the forest. Safe, victorious, and bound by an unspoken understanding, no matter how deep the flood, no matter how fierce the storm, some bonds could never be broken.